We're going to do a well inspection today, or a well systems inspection is what we call it, because we're actually not going into the physical wellhead. First thing you need to do before you start pumping water, before you do anything, is actually try to figure out how your water comes into your house and how it exits your system. On this house, we have water coming into this pipe right here, coming up, comes over to this cistern here. Now, a lot of our houses don't have cisterns. This cistern's a little unique in that it's a pressurized cistern. Typically when we have a cistern, we also use a jet pump, so we have two pumps. On this one, we're only using one pump. So our water comes up, goes into the tank, comes back through, then we come down. Here's our pressure tank. This switch here, on most homes, it turns the pump on and off. On this house, we have a float in here that turns the pump on and off in conjunction with this. So checking the current flow here wouldn't do you any good because you're actually not running pump current through it. We have a 40-60 switch here, which means water, the pump turns on at 40 psi and it turns off at 60 psi. That more mimics city water. Most of our cities now regulate their water pressure to 50 to 55 psi. So your faucets are all designed to run that. We see 20-40 switches, which is pretty low. I don't typically like to see those unless you're just using it for like an egg well or for your barn, things like that. 30-50, we see quite a few of those. But like I say, I really prefer to see the 40-60 because I know my clients are going to be happier because they don't notice that drastic up down on their water pressure. I always look at the pressure switch here to see what kind of shape the contacts are in. It's kind of like the old points on a car. If we see them burnt, then I write up that they're burnt because when that fails, they're not going to have any water. We don't have it on this, but of a lot of our low producing wells, there's actually a lever on the side of this. That switch is called a pump saver. So if our water volume drops, which means we're running a well dry, it actually turns off the pressure switch so our pump just doesn't keep pumping air and burn the pump out. In Colorado, we see a lot of those. We have a lot of low producing wells in the mountains, so it's something you want to look for. I do talk to my clients about that, and the well just kicked on, the pump just kicked on. If you have a pump saver and the power goes out to the house, you have to physically reset that if you run any water, so that way you don't have your clients call you the first time their power goes out and they have no water. They think they have a pump. Worst comes to worst, if they actually called a pump contractor out there, they're paying to have a guy come out and look at. All they have to do is flip a switch. In conjunction with the pressure switch, we should have a control box. Most of our well pumps, the manufacturer will void warranty if we don't have a control box. They're actually rated for the current flow or the size of the pump. This one here is for a 1/3 horse and a half pump. We have 8 amps, so we have, I believe, a 3/4 horsepower pump. Some of them will be rated for 10.2 max amps, so you just want to make sure that they're rated for the same. This here, like I say, a lot of times we can check our current flow down there. When I first start, I like to check and see what it is to begin with. We're just a shade over 8. I really start monitoring it at about 15 minutes, and then I'll come in here and I'll look at that, take a picture of it every 15 minutes. The reason I do that is if our current flow starts to drop, that means we're starting to pump air. It means we're going to run out of water pretty soon. If our current flow starts to rise, it means our pump is failing. I'll abort the test if we start to see a sharp rise, because I'd rather tell somebody their well pump is bad and they still have water in their house than their well pump is bad and they don't have any water anymore when I leave. Going to that, when we do a well inspection, we have a seller's notice that the seller has to sign off on that states I'm going to be running their well for 2 to 3 hours. The ultimate purpose of a flow test is to catch marginal well pumps. So my job is actually to break this well pump. So I want them to sign off. They understand we're doing that so that when it happens, and it has happened a couple times, that the pump starts to fail and I shut down, but sometimes a pump will fail and it fails. And if they haven't signed off on it, then they're going to be asking you to buy them a new pump, and you did your job. So I would advise you to do that. So like I said, we're going to keep an eye on this. This here is the pressure tank. When we're all done pumping our water for 2 to 3 hours, what I do is I shut off the pump, let the water completely drain out. Right here is basically like a tire Schrader valve. When we have all the water pumped out of this, we want to check our air pressure here. It should be 2 pounds less than what our turn on is. So we had a 40-60 switch, means we should have 38 psi inside this for this bladder. That's what prevents your pump from having to turn on, off, on, off, on, off every time that you have the faucets turned on. Your pump will run for days continually. It doesn't hurt it at all. Turning the pump on and off is actually where all the wear takes place. So this helps prevent that from becoming a problem. I've seen pressure tanks turn a 15-year pump into a 1-year pump. So always make sure you check their pressure tank. Down here is the gauge. I look at the gauge, don't always figure they're accurate, but that kind of gives you an idea. Okay, we're turning on at 40, we're turning off at 60. There are 2 screws here in this that can be changed. So a 30-50 pump, their switch, a 20-40 switch, and a 40-60 switch are exactly the same switch. They just move these nuts. So just because this says something, it may be changed. My mountain house, I actually have mine set at a 50-70. I liked a little better water pressure so we could have more than one shower at the same time. So it's just a matter of changing these nuts here. So look at this, but then verify with your gauge. Behind us is a cistern. This looks like a 300-gallon cistern. When you're pumping through a cistern, you need to calculate your water. You need to use math. Unfortunately, outside we have a gauge, we have a clock that does our total gallons per minute. But you have to calculate, know the size of it. You're going to have to use pi r squared. We put a rule on here just so we can see where our water starts, where we end, so we know exactly how far we've dropped. Since this is a little unique, this one is pressurized, our water level is actually going up and down when the pump kicks on. So we may end up, and it does look like we're close, that we're going to be pumping very similar to the same thing into here as we're pumping out. Where typically with a cistern, you'll run the jet pump, you'll bring the pressure down, turn the jet pump off, and then we'll fill it back up and we'll see exactly what we're flowing from the pump itself. In my truck, I have heater hose from cars, I have a bunch of fittings, so if possible, I like to pull the pipe out of the cistern and run directly out of the pump, and then I don't have to do any of those calculations. But when you are on a pressurized cistern, I can't do that without breaking the seal.